They were spinning out, using AI, like these really complicated whiteboard images about how it works and what are all the features. And I forced him to take a step back and say, what are you actually solving for here? And we realized that it wasn't that the features were moving the needle in terms of the conversations, because that wasn't what mattered to the actual buyers. The users cared about that, and the technical folks on the team who would come around to kick the tires, they cared about that. But the people who actually were cutting the checks, they wanted to know on a high level, what does this do for me? Hi, my name is Marlena Sarunac. I'm the co-founder of the company Advice. We exist to help mostly early stage tech startups tackle marketing and branding issues in their early stages. We have this fun stat from CB Insights that 62% of startups fail just strictly due to marketing and branding issues, and we're here to solve that.
Yeah, there's a famous article called like the most important thing, I think, in the Combinator library. And spoiler alert, if you haven't, I'm sorry for the listeners that I'm spoiling the article, but the most important thing is the market. It doesn't matter how good the product is. If you can't package it in a way that resonates to a specific segment in the market, it doesn't work. And so I'm surprised it's only 62% because there's so many like
You
reasons
see a lot
why.
of companies that kind of are flying under the radar that just start generating revenue, and you're like, what's
Yeah.
going on here? And I think that's often, it has to do with the founders, it has to do with key partnerships, it has to do with their investors and their board. And yeah, I think it is possible to fly under the radar with marketing and brand, but I wouldn't bank on it. Like, why not just invest in some early foundation building that can move the needle for you?
Yeah, and in a way, maybe flying under the radar is like a marketing strategy, right? Like basically like a tech security company. It might be relationships are embedded in like existing software, like as like a
Hmm.
plugin, and that's technically going to market. But when there's like consumer startups, like consumer brands, like B2B, you might be able to get away with not having the most fantastical, like resonant brand. But I think I'm just going to say something very bold, and you can correct me if I say it, but I think like B2C, like brand is everything. It's like starting a new clothing line, right? Like software is getting more and more commoditized. And like, how do you differentiate? It's the feeling you feel when you interact with a company.
100% B2C is much more expensive with marketing, with branding. And frankly, it is probably the reason why I've strayed away from it. I prefer B2B. I think it's a little more
Yeah.
straightforward. But what I will say is, regardless of whether you think that you need to invest in what your website looks like and what you outwardly look like, your talking points need to be crystallized, and your understanding of what the market needs to be crystallized. And if you don't have that in place, you're just paddling without oars. So I think that you can cut down runway, or sorry, increase runway, but cut down on how your product roadmap is pivoting if you start getting market signal early on. And you really can't do that unless you have some crystallized talking points that you can consistently put out there and start getting signal on, like, whether these points are resonating and whether these are actual pain points of your customers.
Can you walk me through a time where an adjustment to talking points led to like a huge lift in conversions or sales or maybe even improved retention, like, like the activated member brand experience within the product? Love to hear a little bit about those like high leverage stories. One of my favorite books is Rory Sutherland's Alchemy, where he just gives case studies where it's like, oh, we just changed the packaging. Oh,
I thought I had it behind me, but I don't.
yeah, like, yeah, it's there's that famous story of we want a faster elevator, and then I don't know who did it in the story, but they're like, what if we just put mirrors in the elevator, and all the complaints for speed went down because what the speed wasn't the problem, it was boredom. When you solve the boredom
Mm.
problem, you didn't need a faster elevator. So I'd love to hear maybe like a case study to get this started, to talk about how like a very relatively like low cost solution of just
Mhm.
like adjusting the messaging increase business outcomes.
I can speak to maybe like a recent client that we've been consulting with, and They're a very technical team. They've been around for a while. They're spinning out a new product. They're not sure if it's a feature, if it's a product, and they're just so technically in the weeds with this thing. They were spinning out using AI, like these really complicated whiteboard images about how it works and what are all the features. And I forced him to take a step back and say, what are you actually solving for here? And we realized that it wasn't that the features were moving the needle in terms of the conversations, because that wasn't what mattered to the actual buyers. The users cared about that, and the technical folks on the team who would come around to kick the tires, they cared about that. But the people who actually were signing the checks, they wanted to know on a high level, what does this do for me? And we realized that by positioning it instead of as a set of features, we talked about it more as like that we were actually solving for this last mile gap between an existing solution and the current reality for this particular subset of healthcare companies. By calling it like this last mile gap, it clicked so much quicker. And the CEO started noticing that the conversations were moving along much faster because he was getting caught up as a technical founder in these details that were the buyers were glossing over. And when we just put a succinct little stamp, little tagline that said what it was, he was able to advance much more quickly through the sales process and be able to actually start putting out content that people were actually reading because they knew what this was all about. So he was able to accelerate from basically, is this a product? Is this a feature? Is this an idea? To no, this is a company and we're actually making sales now. And so I think sometimes you just need that person, objective person who's coming into the room. I'm an interesting kind of a marketing consultant in that I do have an engineering degree. And so part of my job is quite literally translating the technical into human speak, into the buyer market speak. And so I can actually listen to that technical person and translate that into something that makes sense to folks who are signing that check.
Would you say that like most B2B scenarios, like we take, so my background's in product design and
Mhm.
I'm like a PM designer hybrid at this point in my career because I've learned as if you get too caught up in like the design, it's really hard to pitch ideas when you can't like commercially frame like why this design change would improve the experience. My experience with like B2B software is I, it's rarely based off merit. It's based off of like buying persona preference, right? So like we see it all the time when a new VP comes in, you might already have like Notion, you already have a software for like a wiki, and they're just like, I use Confluence in my past jobs. We're going to switch everything over to Confluence and do all this churn or something like that. And you get functionally the same like outcome. You have documents stored in a wiki somewhere. And so it's like branding, it's the feeling, it's the experience. And in like B2B sales, it's rarely the user that's buying. And so using user mental models in the marketing
Mhm.
aren't like what's going to do it for most people. Would you say that that's mostly true in your experience?
I would say it's mostly true. I think you have to take into consideration them as a stakeholder at the table, but not the purse holder. So I think I've done this transformation at several companies where there are a lot of brilliant things being built by technical folks, and they are still in the mindset of solving a problem that they've seen, they've personally experienced, and they have an incredible solution for it, and they can only speak to the other users. And they have a really hard time pulling back and saying, okay, actually, maybe it's the VP of product who's making this call and not the engineer who's actually going to have to work with this API or this data set or this infrastructure or the software, whatever the cell is. And I think that's what I really love doing is I really love translating that level for folks. And I think it's a very prevalent and common issue with a lot of these startups. So I think you hit it on the head.
It also makes me think of something I like to do is pull like a different like parallel problem space, which is executive presence and communication. A lot of the advice you get when you're trying to move up from IC and get into the executive role is that you have to
Mhm.
do like the bottom line up front, and you have to explain like the takeaway up front because executives value their time,
Mhm.
and even if they want to, they don't have the budget and their time to explore the weeds. Like they're hoping that you've already done all the thinking for them by the time you bring a message to them. You tell them the
Hmm.
bottom line. And so that's something I'm continuing to work on. I love I have a podcast. It's not exactly helping my executive concise communication skills. I like doing hour-long conversations, but I try not to give a podcast when talking to executives now because I'm like, oh, if they like product, like they're gonna love like the story of how he got to the strategic insight. And even if they do care about the stuff, they don't have the time, and they only have 30 minutes to like help you make a decision.
Hmm.
And when you say like, oh, just like one tagline, people might dismiss that and be like, ah, whatever. Like it's just words. What was like the strategic insight behind that tagline? Like, how did you decide what that tagline was going to be in the first place? Because I think
Hmm.
there's a ton of work. I mean, we're on a podcast, so now you get to tell me
Oh
all the
yeah,
stories. Like, yeah,
yeah,
like,
absolutely. This was weeks of heads down market analysis, diving deep with the team, doing workshops where we talked about the product at length. We usually start with an asynchronous survey input form, like a questionnaire that helps us assess, it's like an early diagnostic.
mhm.
And 9 out of 10 times, even the survey responses, the team members differ on how they all are interpreting the product, what it's solving for, and who the buyer is and who the user is. And 9 out of 10 times when we start discussing the results of the survey and the inputs that they put in, they're actually realizing that's not what they meant in words and they need to talk it out. And so there's a lot of steps and a lot of nuances that we need to peel back before we can actually get to that nugget, like that insight. And I think that is like one thing that is going to be really hard to replace with automation or tools or AI. Like sometimes you just need human beings in a room to talk through a problem and brainstorm it together because you need folks in the room who know which questions to ask and which topics to push on in order to glean that insight. And so just to your point, it was weeks of strategy, workshopping, research, iterating on some messaging ideas. I like to create like a loose framework at the top. So basically, okay, so we just had all these conversations. What I think your brand pillars are. What I think are your key differentiators in the market. How does this sound and feel and look? And we debate it. And then that is when like the magic happens with that spiffy tagline. That is when the magic happens where you start to have a brand come to life and marketing language come to life. You cannot skip these steps. A lot of people want that tagline. You simply can't skip the process of assembling the ingredients before having your cake. And a lot of folks are like, actually, I just want the icing. And you're like, okay, we still have to do with these other foundational building things before we can have that magical first bite of that cake. It's a process that we've gone through a lot with a lot of our clients. And we think that in this startup space, we've condensed it a lot. I think when people hear consultants, they think of like suits or like the two Bobs from Office Space, like coming in and scaring everyone. For us, it's not that. We've come up with a process to do this like pretty quickly on an accelerated timeline because people don't have time to putz around when they're building a product and trying to sell it at the same time. And what we advise folks on too is let's not belabor the point either. Let's do these things. Let's think about it thoughtfully. Let's get some assumptions down on paper and then let's get some hypotheses out in the market and see how it responds. Because they'll ask me a lot, do you think this is it? Do you think people are going to get it? And I'm going to say, I don't know. You got to start putting it out in the market and start collecting signal and start collecting the data. And let's see what they say. Nothing has to be written in stone here, but we need to have some intelligent assumptions put into these things before we go to market so that we know what we're even measuring. And then let the market tell you, oh, really interesting. That last mile gap. Okay. Do you mean this or like that? And then if it's something really insightful, then we fold that in. It's an iterative process.
Yeah, and there's no excuse to like putz around. It's so easy to, vibe code a landing page and just
Totally.
test it out with someone, like get on a customer call or test out ads. It's the anti-pattern with like consultants, and it might be like the management consultant company's faults,
Hmm.
where it's like this false sense of like certainty. We spreadsheeted the crap out of this problem, crunched the
Hmm.
numbers. We know exactly what's going to happen. Like this is completely objective. It rarely works as defined in the slide deck. but how you're framing it is what you bring to the table as a marketing consultant is that you bring judgment and taste. You know how to like frame like the brand pillars. Like, what are the promises? Like, what are the promises you want to make to the company? And I've noticed a lot of strategy discussions are a lot better when okay, what's our positioning statement? Are we
Hmm.
this or this?
Yep.
And then you start getting into the weeds of like where the biases are of like, no, like we're solving this problem. Okay. That positioning is not resonating with the people you're trying to sell to. So we need to we need to like reposition first. And those kind of discussions like need to happen because if they don't and you come up with a cool grip brand campaign and you're like, oh yeah, this is really great. It looked nice, but then it doesn't convert. You think the client's going to think that you didn't. Oh, yeah, marketing's woo woo, right? But it
Hmm.
isn't. You could test
Hmm.
things out. And what you just described reminds me a lot of like how comedians like build a 1 hour special is it's a lot of just test audiences and like dive bars where they're just telling jokes. And then if the joke doesn't land, they just write a note and they're doing maybe like months and months of work to develop that special. And it's the work that you like don't see that most people don't understand about like good marketing.
100%. Brilliant analogy. I love that.
Yeah, like so how do you frame that to like a client who's expecting you to just ask a bunch of questions, give you a deck of like what to do?
Often our other analogy is we'll have CEOs who are hung up on the color of the walls of the house that hasn't been built yet.
Mm.
Again, like just trying to skip over that foundation building, and they'll be like, we've literally had this conversation with a prospect. It did not convert. Where they said, "What would happen if we just didn't do the foundation?" And then with his team was like looked a little bit shocked for a moment because I think that everybody understood what would happen if you don't build the foundation. The walls come down and you can't build anything else on top of it. And so I think it's all about just like laying it out for the folks who don't get the process. And for the most part, they do. And for the most part, they do appreciate it. And the other thing that we've alluded to when we talk about why it's important to invest in this stuff now is a lot of folks understand technical debt, right? If you take certain shortcuts now, you're going to pay for it later. And you're going to have to rebuild out that part of your system or code or clean it up at some point later. That debt accumulates. And that happens in marketing and branding as well. So you could start building something really great and have no brand, have no real messaging behind it. It's going to catch up with you and you're going to have to do it retroactively at some point. And it might be even much harder and much more expensive then. So we think that by doing just like some fundamental, like really rudimentary, fundamental common sense, to your point earlier, good tape rollouts at the upfront, you can have less debts later on that you need to clean up and you can go to market more confidently.
And decide like when it's a good time to swipe that credit card, like that debt, that brand debt credit card for like a longer play, right? You
Mhm.
could say like your current, maybe they're already a successful company and they want to like go to the next level. Then you realize the positioning's wrong. Like, I mean, with this podcast, it started out as the way of product design and had a ton of listeners, it was very like vertically focused into the product design market. But then as I got more experience in my career, I knew that successful products is a team sport and there's so many different moving parts to like make something successful. Like you can't just have a team of product designers and not have like good product marketers, great engineers. Like any one of those things, it fails. And so I had to make the hard decision of like, oh, my positioning isn't what I want to do in the long term. And I had, I guess like maybe it wasn't debt, but maybe a misalignment with like what I wanted to position this thing as in the long term. And I ended up repositioning it to be more about making products in general and broadening the guest roster. And in the short term, it led to like pretty big like dive in the numbers I was used to because it
Mm.
was more focused. But then I started getting better, I think like more relevant, like bigger guests from different like job families. that
Mhm.
ended up paying off. But like for a little bit, I was like, shoot, I just blew up something that's good. So
Scary.
yeah, it's very
It's always
scary.
scary to pivot, to change anything, to get out of some like your comfort zone. Like comfort zone is when it comfort zone means predictable normalcy, right? A comfort zone can be disrupted really easily if you don't keep your eye on the ball. And I think you took a risk. It's paid off, but it was definitely scary. And I think in life, right? And it's building businesses, building products, everything, relationships.
Like how often? So you do startups. So these are companies that don't have established brands.
Hmm.
And there's a really good story, and I think it's the Sony founder. I think it's like Hakio Morita. Anyways, he was just starting out in Sony. This is at post World War II Tokyo. Like they have to have umbrellas at their desks, and they're trying to do this deal to sell some of their electronics to this big retailer. And he said that the retailer wanted their stuff, but they wanted to put their brand on their equipment. And he's, no, that's not going to happen. And the retailer said, we have 50 years of brand. Like we have a really good name to put by this. So that's valuable. You should that's why you should like let us license your stuff. And he said, yeah, well, we're just getting started and we plan on being in business for 50 years. So I'll start right now and build that brand. And so for younger companies, there is like a kind of pay your dues aspect of developing like that brand equity that helps build momentum over a long time horizon. And so how do you compensate in the short term when there isn't that like level of like feeling and precedent around like a company?
I think it's by building out your credibility. So you the only way that you can start to make a splash is if you have credible claim, and that can be through who's building your product, how it's being built, and who's using it, and the outcomes that they're generating from using that product or solution. And so I don't think that you need to have the ultra deluxe enterprise packaged brand at the onset. That's actually what we actively advise against. But you need to have something that is appealing. Well-designed websites convert up to 200% more. So you're going to create better inbound interest, not just from potential leads, but also investors too. Like everyone's human and everyone's driven visually. I would say most people are driven by visual cues. And if something like looks good and it sounds good, and it feels good as a product, like now you've gotten a slam dunk. I think that, yeah, I think that's kind of like how you would go about it. You don't have to have all the bells and whistles up and running just yet, but you should have something and it should make sense and it should be something that you can build upon. I see also some brands get locked in to certain like brand elements because it just wasn't thoughtfully done. And now they're like, well, we have to use this color now for everything. And now the system is this color. And now we have the websites to use this color and all the emails. That's not true. You just had to come up with a palette that made sense and that was like thoughtfully pulled together at the onset so that you can have room to explore and grow and expand and iterate and potentially pivot. I think as a general rule of thumb, you should anticipate that something is majorly going to change about your product or company in that first year of launching. And you should be building your timelines, your budgets, and your strategy with this kind of like buffer in mind that there's going to be some kind of dramatic change.
What would you think is like a minimum viable brand, right? With something like iterate, because when I hear rebrand, there are rebrands
Mhm.
where it fails because it wasn't an iteration. They really were like, oh, we're just going to reinvent this thing. I think,
Mhm.
would you say that successful rebrands are just an iteration? It's still like taking notes from like the prior positioning before that? Because then if that's the case, then you're thinking like, what's the minimum viable brand? What's enough positioning that like I know I could build on top of this if we are successful?
I think it depends from company to company. It depends on what people have come to expect from a particular company. And I think it depends on what the company's position is in the market, what their values are, et cetera. But really, what it comes down to is storytelling. I think that if you just put up a LinkedIn post, and you're like, we have a new logo and it's so much cooler now, and that's it. Okay. Moving on. But if you have like really compelling storytelling about this is what you learned, this is what you are aspiring toward, this brand is a good reflection of that, It's a extension of who you are as a product service offering set of human beings. If that rebrand is doing a good job of articulating that, then I think that's an opportunity to really excite the market. And it's a way to have a voice in a noisy space, that you're doing something differentiated and you did it thoughtfully, and it's all about improving the ultimate experience for your end users and for your buyers. So it's got to have cohesive storytelling attached to it. It can't just be like a random coat of paint on an old car. There has to be something to it that has a human element to it at its core.
Yeah. One company that did, I think, is going in a good direction brand wise is OpenAI, where they actually started making commercials with real people, like with real video, like real crews and everything. Even though they're making the technology to replace that, whoever's in charge of brand there, they made a very intentional decision of, no, we're going to make a real commercial to tell the
Hmm.
story of like this couple on their road trip using ChatGPT to like get an
Hmm.
itinerary. What's one of your favorite maybe like brand glow ups that you've noticed, like a company you admire that they're like, oh wow, they did this really good, and like what did they do right that like made you like it so much?
I think it's a great question. And just like to comment on the OpenAI thing, I think whoever's leading brand there, I think this is like a classic, incredible example of people doing their market research first before blowing through gazillions of dollars of budget. They heard the market say, this thing scares us and it's replacing human beings. I don't like it. It's coming from my job. It's potentially wasteful. And I think it's such a fantastic example of a team, of a brand team that did their market research, because that commercial didn't just come out of nowhere. It wasn't like, oh, let's do a human commercial. It was because they know that the market is scared of what they are building. They heard from the market, people are scared that this is coming for their jobs. It's replacing humans. It's something autonomous. It's something, it's something that they don't totally fully understand. It's unclear right now how it's going to change how companies run, how jobs are done. There's so much to this new power that OpenAI is yielding. And so for them to run that commercial that so humanized the benefits of the platform in such a simple way, that was a brilliant market research connected to strategy play. So a hat tip to that team because they really nailed it.
And what's another example of, actually, I want to double click on that because I didn't think about why the commercial was good. I just was like, oh, this is good. I can't explain why. But that's such a good
Mhm.
point. Is, I mean, I'm scared of AI and like what people are building, and in a lot of ways, OpenAI, I don't actually use their app directly. Like right now I'm like using like Perplexity or Claude, but like Claude does a really good job positioning themselves where they're like, hey, this is AI for thinkers. We're not trying to get the whole market. Like we're
Mhm.
trying to help like engineers and makers like think through their problems, and how they like built their product was more about as like a thought partner rather than this thing that replaces you, or like Perplexity saying like, oh, we're just a better answers engine than Google or something like that. But it's like
Mhm.
it is scary, and it's like it would have been kind of like spitting in our face to like make an AI commercial. Oh, we don't care about your feelings. If that was really smart.
Mhm. Yeah. In terms of examples of other company glow ups that you were looking for, I'll be honest, I can't think of anything specific. I will say, though, that I think that there are a lot of companies who have done a pretty good job of moving from scrappy startup to more like enterprise feeling.
Yeah.
And so some things that kind of come to mind are like Airbnb or Uber. I just remember at the beginning, like it feeling scrappy and new. And this ages me too, because I was like one of those early adopters of both platforms. And then slowly but surely, they were applying like a finessed aesthetic direction that you barely even noticed as a user. You never felt, if you've been using Airbnb for the last 10 years plus, I don't think that you've noticed that they've changed. But if you look at the very first iteration of the brand to what it is now, you would definitely notice that there's been a big difference in just like the logo, the branding elements, and the website, how the platform looks and feels, the offerings on there. But they've released things so slowly and thoughtfully. I don't think that you ever had a jarring experience as a user. Additionally, I'll spend a lot of time in the health tech space, and you don't usually see a huge brand lift change in this space because it is so heavily dependent on consumer trust and just like the lore of a particular brand. And so I don't really see like a ton of like huge innovation in that space. That said, though, if I can offer a small plug, we did just launch something called the Healthies. And the Healthies are like effectively the Webbies for health tech, marketing, and product design. And so what we're looking for right now are people to submit work that they're proud of, having done it on product and marketing at their respective health tech companies. And we're giving out basically like the best of industry awards to people who are really pushing the needle with branding, with marketing, with the user experience and the design of their products. Because talk about these people as being like the unsung heroes of the space, building really incredible things, very small teams, under-resourced people who are just pulling rabbits out of hats all the time. And we definitely welcome people to come check it out. It's called The Healthy, and you can see who wins in the spring, or you can submit your own if you wanted to. You can also nominate a friend or a brand that you admire in the health tech space.
Yeah. I'd love to like double click on there's also just like two very famous stories with Airbnb and like Uber, where Uber started out as Uber Cab because it was positioning to be like a cab alternative. And then when they started getting like
Mhm.
pushback, they didn't have tokens or anything like that. Like there's that famous like, oh well, it's actually a rideshare company, and like repositioned as like this new paradigm. And it didn't stop the
Mhm.
regulatory problems, but it did, I think, like get the attention away because it was just like the wrong people were anchoring on the word cab. And they're like, well,
Mhm.
we aren't you're right. We're not a cab company. We're not trying to get medallions. We're just trying to like help people access transportation using other like their peers' cars or something like that. And then Airbnb, it was spelled out like Air Bed and Breakfast. It's like we're not like a bed and breakfast. It's really just a way to stay in a place, right? Like live there like a local was like a really awesome campaign they did. And I would also say, like, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is that the best companies have like the product strategy and the brand strategy aligned like one to one, like how you're promising the customer informs like the roadmap, the product design. And you could say that like a little micro rebrand, well, it was pretty big, was like Airbnb during COVID, going into like founder mode, like Brian going in founder mode and saying like we're going to have one unified roadmap because people are complaining that we're not meeting our promises and that there's these hidden fees. And like he saw a
Mhm.
misalignment between brand and the product's roadmap at the time, and he like took control, aligned the roadmap to the brand promise, and he says we're not going to like move on to the next thing until people love the core Airbnb experience. And the
Mhm.
financial outcome was like fantastic. I think like billions of dollars in like free cash flow. Don't quote me on that. I could pull up the SEC filings, but
Mhm.
it was not a small amount of free cash flow after they
Mhm.
aligned brand and product strategy.
Marketing, brand, product have to be aligned, and that is exactly how we built the company Advice. My co-founder handles all things on the product design side of the house.
Mhm.
And at first, it's interesting because we didn't know what to call ourselves. Thought partners felt a little woo-woo and loosey-goosey, and then agency felt like a little bit more predictable in a way that we are not. And when we went out to market at the beginning, people couldn't make sense of what we did, and we were told, "It's confusing what you do." But in our minds, it wasn't confusing, it was incredibly obvious that these 2 sides of the house need to be the 2 sides of the equation need to be married. Because if there's misalignment, exactly to your point, you're gonna have unhappy people. You're going to have a product that doesn't meet the brand promise, or you're gonna have a or you won't have a brand promise that reflects the power of the products. That is why my partner Lubna and I, we go into all these projects together and do these diagnostics together, looking at the marketing, the branding, and the product. and making our ultimate advice, which is why we're called the company advice, our advice is anchored in how to make sure that these are aligned fully. And now that we've gone through the motion, I mean, we've consulted almost 30 clients in the last 2 years. People get it once they're in the room with us. But the sell can be a little bit difficult because it's not a typical agency structure and it's not consulting.
Yeah, and the tough thing about having a more like trusted advisor type brand is also your personal brand, right? Like
Mhm.
it's like, oh, because we can't like grasp on the offer because it's not productized, it's based off expertise. Like I'd imagine the short term trade off was at the expense of like having a harder sell. Like this is the kind of company we want to run, and if it means
Yeah.
it's harder to like scale in the first few years because I'm building up my book and my relationships. Because like McKinsey doesn't like, I mean, does the same thing, but they've been around for a long time, and I'm sure in the first like 10 years of McKinsey, it wasn't as like relationship focused, but it was just this long term like referral based, relationship based, like choosing
Mhm.
to do that instead of being like, oh, I'm a realtor and like I'm like you're my uncle, so you should sell your house through me, even though I might not be the best realtor ever. It takes some like courage to like stick to that brand of like trusted advisor because you are betting on yourself that way.
Absolutely, and it's been interesting. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because in my career as a marketing executive, I'm I would have a seat at the leadership table, but I was almost always like the founder or CEOs, like more like a background person, right hand person. My job was to elevate them, their story, the company story. The spotlight was never on me. I was just pushing others, like the subject matter experts in the product, the leaders, into the spotlight. And so now that it's time to turn the playbook around on myself and put myself in the spotlight, it's been a there are moments of discomfort where you have to talk about yourself and validate why you are confident in this space, but it's starting to get a little bit easier as the years go by. I'm like, you know what? I do know some things and I am happy to talk about them and I am happy for the spotlight to be on me. And it's really the only way that we can break out of that referral based network, which we've been lucky, very lucky to have a very strong referral network. But I think that we can have even more folks out that don't even know we exist, can't even conceptualize that this service exists.
Mm-hmm. And they could go off of the brands that work with you that
Hmm.
to know, okay, they trust these people. I've read like their articles. I like the way that they think. I'd love to talk. It's like 37 Singles. That's their whole thing is you almost become like a patron of the arts. Like love, hate email, even though there's like free AI options for email now. Like I'm still like a
Hmm.
loyal customer because I'm a big fan of the people driving that company. And I feel like that's like a sweet spot where like as that company, you have to be founder led to pull it off, but yeah, it's such a if you like talk about a dream job is you're getting they're not hiring you because they want a consultant. They want Marlena to work on this marketing problem. And I think anyone like listening, like if you want a career where you're able to just express yourself and get to that point, like that you have to start differentiating yourself from like other people in the job family. Like you can't just act like other product designers or PMs. You have to get to a point where like you give like a unique contribution to the market.
Yeah, and I think that unique contribution comes from being heads down, doing the grueling grunt work for a long time
Yeah.
until you completely understand the problem from the inside out. You can put a shape to the problem. So when others come to you with their problems, you've learned to identify like the pattern recognition. You know, like I've seen this before and I know how to help you. But you can't do that by putzing your way through life, ChatGPTing all of your answers, not doing the hard work yourself, not having that disappointing presentation to the team that the results aren't what you thought they were going to be. You have to put yourself through that, or else you're never going to know how to recognize the patterns, figure out the solutions, come up with the right plays that are going to work. And that I think applies whether or not you want to consult or whatever your job is currently. You have to do the grunt work. You have to fail.
Yeah, like you have to be seen as the subject matter expert, and then you have to have the grace and the I guess, like regard and consideration for other people, that you don't make them feel small with how smart you've gotten by doing the grunt
Mhm.
work, which is something that
Oh, yeah, of
I've always
course.
struggled with, is that I do all that work and I'll let my work speak for itself. Find out really quick, no, that's not true. And then,
Yeah.
but then it's like you start being like a trusted advisor and people are like coming to you, but then they stop coming to you because you make them feel small because you act too professorial with them, or in my case, you geek out too much. And so
Mhm.
then it's like refining. I'm just like, isn't this so cool? And they're like, great, I need help with my thing. And getting to that place where they feel like, man, like I love pulling them in. Can we bring Caden into the room or Marlena into the room because I want to hear their take on this? Like that
Mhm.
special balance is like huge. Do you feel like there's anything?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel, Marlena, is there anything that you feel like hasn't been said that should be said before we go off record?
I think this was a really great chat. I love geeking out on this stuff
Yeah.
all day long. Folks can reach out to us at the company advice or me directly on LinkedIn. Happy to be a set of eyes on whatever thing that they're working on. If they have a portfolio company that's just like stuck or something like that, we have a lot of experience jumping in on these calls and just taking a look at stuff and maybe offering like a high level like diagnostic assessment and then see where it goes from there. But I think it's a really interesting space to learn and grow and iterate in. I think if you're trying to be an expert in whatever domain you're working on, you have to do it 1,000 times and you have to fail a bunch of times, and that's what's gonna make you an expert. And I hope that makes people feel a little bit better that if they just keep doing it and learning and can talk about it intelligently, that they'll be fine. They'll be totally fine in life.
If there was like one link, like if anyone's listening right now, if there's one link that you'd like them to go to in your body of work, what would be the primary call to action for you?
Yeah, go to thecompanyadvice.com. There you'll find insights on our in our advice column. We tackle really common questions, issues, problems that founders are facing and startups are facing. You can also find the link to the Help Eat there. And you can also just see a little bit more about what we're about. I think you'll see a little bit more of our personality come through in that website. And so you can see like where we came from, what we're working on, and you can scroll through our portfolio and just kind of see if this is something that you need or you're interested on in working on.
Marlena, I could keep going. Eventually, I think I'm just gonna have to like re-platform, I guess, do another brand adjustment, positioning adjustment, and go to 2 hour long conversation episodes. Yeah, like maybe one day. I keep geeking out about this. I love talking about like marketing because it really is like the most important thing. As a not marketing person, I've really learned to appreciate like the craft of like how do you resonate with people that
Mhm,
want to
mhm.
pay you money. And honestly, like the best brands out there have free word of mouth marketing. Like that's my like litmus test of like what a great product is. So I really appreciate the conversation. Thank you so much, and you have a good one.
Same here. Thank you.
Hey, listener, thanks again for listening to The Way of Product. As we power down today's session on the fusion of creativity and technology, let's solidify the energy you've gotten from our dialogue today. If you've gleaned insights or strategies that could turbocharge your projects, I have a small but powerful ask. Swing by the platform where you're hearing this and leave a review. Think of it as your digital high five to us. It's a fuel that propels this content to more creative technologists like you, amplifying the impact of the shared knowledge. So until our next interview, keep pioneering and pushing the envelope. Thanks again for lending your ears and your imagination to our community. Catch you on the next download.